Alright, guys, let's get started with part 2 of our reading of State and Revolution. This part is Chapter 1, Part 1, The State, a product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. He says, what's now happening to Marx's theory has, in the course of history, happened repeatedly to the theories of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of oppressed classes fighting for emancipation. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. But after their deaths, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names to a certain extent for the consolation of the oppressed classes, and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge, and vulgarizing it. Today, the bourgeoisie and the opportunists within the labor movement concur in this doctoring of Marxism. They omit, obscure, or distort the revolutionary side of this theory, its revolutionary soul. They push to the foreground and extol what is or seems acceptable to the bourgeoisie. All the social chauvinists are now Marxists. Don't laugh. And more frequently, German bourgeois scholars, only yesterday specialists in the annihilation of Marxism, are speaking of the national German Marx, who they claim educated the labor unions, which are so splendidly organized for the purpose of waging a predatory war. Wow. In these circumstances, in view of the unprecedentedly widespread distortion of Marxism, our prime task is to reestablish what Marx really taught on the subject of the state. This will necessitate a number of long quotations from the works of Marx and Engels themselves. Of course, long quotations will render the text cumbersome and not help at all to make it popular reading, but we can't possibly dispense with them all. All, or at any rate, all the most essential passages in the works of Marx and Engels on the subject of the state must by all means be quoted as fully as possible so that the reader may form an independent opinion of the totality of the views on the founders of scientific socialism and on the evolution of those views, and so that their distortion by the Kautskyism now prevailing may be a documentarily proved and clearly demonstrated. So let's begin with the most popular of Engels' works, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, the 6th edition of which was published in Stuttgart as far back as 1894. We have to translate the quotations from the German originals, as the Russian translations, while very numerous, are for the most part either incomplete or very unsatisfactory. So, summing up his historical analysis, Engels says, "The state, therefore, by no means a power forced on society from without, just as little is it the reality of the ethical idea, the image and reality of reason, as Hegel maintains. Rather, it is the product of society at a certain stage of development. It is the admission that this society has become entangled with an insoluble contradiction with itself, that it has split into irreconcilable antagonisms, which it is powerless to dispel. But in order that these antagonisms, these classes with differing economic interests, might not consume themselves and society in fruitless struggle, it may become necessary to have a power seemingly standing above society that would alleviate the conflict and keep it within the bounds of order. And this power, arisen out of society, but placing itself above all and alienating itself more and more from it, is the state." So he says, this expresses with perfect clarity the basic idea of Marxism with regard to the historical role and the meaning of the state. The state is a product and manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. The state arises where, when, and insofar as class antagonism objectively cannot be reconciled. And conversely, the existence of the state proves that the class antagonisms are irreconcilable. It is on this most important and fundamental point that the distortion of Marxism proceeding along two main lines begins. On one hand, the bourgeoisie, and particularly the petty bourgeoisie, ideologists compelled under the weight of indisputable historical facts to admit that the state only exists where there are class antagonisms and class struggle. Correct Marx in such a way as to make it appear that the state is an organ for the reconciliation of classes. According to Marx, the state could neither have arisen nor maintained itself had it been possible to reconcile classes. From what the petty bourgeois and Philistine professors and publicists say, with quite frequent and benevolent references to Marx, it appears the state does reconcile classes. But according to Marx, the state is an organ of class rule, an organ for the oppression of one class by another. It is the creation of order which legalizes, perpetuates this oppression by moderating the conflict between classes. Did I say older? I mean order. Jeez. In the opinion of the petty bourgeois politicians, however, order means the reconciliation of classes, and not the oppression of one class by another. To alleviate the conflict means reconciling classes and not depriving the oppressed class of definite means and methods of struggle to overthrow the oppressors. For instance, when, in the Revolution of 1917, the question of the significance and role of the state arose in all its magnitude as a practical question, demanding immediate action, and moreover, action on a mass scale. All the social revolutionaries and Mensheviks descended at once to the petty bourgeois theory that the state reconciles classes. Innumerable resolutions and articles by politicians of both these parties are thoroughly saturated with this petty bourgeois and Philistine reconciliation theory, that the state is an organ of the rule of a definite class which cannot be reconciled with its antipode, the class opposite to it, is something the petty bourgeois Democrats will never be able to understand. Their attitude to the state is one of the most striking manifestations of the fact that our socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks are not socialists at all, a point that we Bolsheviks have always maintained, but petty bourgeois Democrats using near-socialist phraseology. On the other hand, the Kautskyite distortion of Marxism is far more subtle. Theoretically, it's not denied that the state is an organ of class rule or that class antagonisms are irreconcilable. But what is overlooked or glossed over is this. If the state is the product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms, if it is a power standing above society and, quote, alienating itself more and more from it, end quote, it is clear that the liberation of the oppressed class is impossible not only without a violent revolution, but also without the destruction of the apparatus of state power, which was created by the ruling class and which is the embodiment of this alienation. As we'll see later, Marx very explicitly drew this theoretically self-evident conclusion on the strength of a concrete historical analysis of the task of the revolution. And as we will show with detail later on, in this conclusion, which Kautsky has forgotten and distorted. So stay tuned for part 3. Thank you very much for listening.